Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. I am Valeriano Ramos with Everyday Democracy. And of course, I want to welcome all of you to this webinar, The Importance of Redistricting for Our Elections. We are proud to have with us our guest presenter, Ryan Scala, who will be joining us shortly to start this important conversation. This Connecticut Civic Ambassadors event is part of our effort to inform and educate Connecticut voters about the importance of civic engagement for sustaining and strengthening our communities, our civic life, and our democracy. After last year's tumultuous presidential election, the question remains as to how we can remain civically engaged year-round to strengthen our democracy. So our webinar today will highlight some of the ways you can remain engaged beyond Election Day. At this point, I am very pleased to introduce my colleague, Jacqueline Riverdi, who will engage you in a fun and interactive activity and also introduce our guest speaker and presenter.
Great, thank you so much. I think we're going to start with our interactive activity, and once that's over, I will introduce our host for the afternoon. And now let's get this show on the road. I'm going to introduce our host for today. So today's presenter is public policy master's candidate Ryan Scala. Ryan is a Connecticut native who completed his undergrad at UNC Chapel Hill in North Carolina. He came back to Connecticut to complete his master's degree after noticing that the public often consumed political content that was not objective. He wants to use his skill set to objectively analyze information, which is one reason for his interest in the redistricting process. Ryan began drawing district maps over the summer and entered a map drawing contest put on by the Princeton Gerrymandering Project. Although he did not win the contest, Princeton was so impressed with his map that they invited him to join their team of 75 mappers to help achieve their goals. The Princeton Gerrymandering Project aims to create a site which gives district maps a fairness letter grade, like an A, B, C, D, F sort of scale. So legislatures can reference these maps and compare how fair their districts are. Ryan has learned a lot about the redistricting process from this experience, and we are thrilled to have him here to share his knowledge with you all. Ryan, thank you so much for being here today and for all that you have done to make this webinar happen. I'll pass it off to you.
Thanks, Jackie. It's good to be here and do this presentation for you all. You know, I wish I went to Chapel Hill, but I actually went to UNC Charlotte. I don't want to let that slide. No, you're good. All right, let's start. So let me share. Oh, let me share my screen. Okay, good. So today we're going to be talking about redistricting and its importance in our elections. So first off, what is redistricting? So redistricting, in its most basic definition, is the process of drawing electoral district boundaries. So electoral districts can be anything from congressional districts, state legislative districts, or even sometimes city councils, like what the Kahoot referenced before with Bridgeport City Council district boundaries. Usually the process of drawing these boundaries is done every 10 years after the new census data comes out. And states have very different redistricting processes. So they set their own standards for districts. They have that power under the law. Some common district criteria that states use when they draw: compactness, contiguity, proportionality, whether that's based on vote share or racial demographics or communities of interest. And I'm going to talk more about those later on in the presentation. So in terms of a brief history of redistricting, back in the day, way back in the day, 19th century, early 20th century, Congress would have to pass apportionment acts after every census, which designated how many seats each state would get. So they had to pass basically a law every single decade. One year after the census was released in 1920, they failed to pass one of these apportionment acts. They couldn't agree on the distribution of seats, and they did not pass an apportionment act. So the districts stayed the same as they were in 1910 until 1930. So there was a 20-year period where there wasn't any redrawing, or excuse me, reapportionment. In 1929, Congress passed an act that established a permanent way, a permanent method to reapportion seats among states, and it also capped the House of Representatives at 435. And then they amended this act in 1941, and it took Congress out of the process of reapportionment completely. So if so the census people and the government, other government agencies, they're the ones who are in charge of reapportionment now. You won't see Congress voting on apportionment acts anymore. It's just, it hasn't been done since this act was amended in 1941. The fixed seat number at 435 in the House, however, that's very important, because over the years, even though the district number stayed the same for our Congress, our population obviously grew all over the country. And so our districts have tripled in size since 1929 because of that population growth. It was a little over 200,000 people per district back then, but now we have districts that represent over 700,000 people in the United States. In the 1960s, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the one person, one vote idea. There are many court cases that they ruled that kind of confirmed this ideal that every person gets one whole vote and people's vote shouldn't be diluted. And that's why they mandated that districts have all had approximately the same population. So before these SCOTUS rulings, you would have districts that had more people than other districts. And now we've basically made all the districts equal in population with some small differences, but they're all around 725,000 people. And it also ended the districts at large. So some states, even though they had more than one kind of regional district, they would also elect members to Congress at large, kind of like senators. They got, in the 1960s, Congress, or the Supreme Court rulings kind of scrapped that all together. So we don't have at large members of the House of Representatives anymore. So let's talk a little bit about the different redistricting processes that you see in states. One of the main ones, and probably I think the most states go through this kind of process, is state legislature control. And basically, it's fairly straightforward. There's some variations of this, and I'll go into them. But basically, the legislature votes on the map. So whether it's a simple majority or a supermajority depends on the state, but the legislature controls ultimately what map is implemented. And most legislatures have full control of this process, so they're the ones who draw the maps and vote on them. But also there are some legislature processes that include commissions. So Connecticut, along with Ohio and Indiana, is one that has a backup commission set up. So if the legislature cannot agree on a map, which they haven't this cycle, and I don't think they have in previous cycles for many decades, it goes to a backup commission, and the backup commission depends on the state. In Connecticut, it's the members are General Assembly leadership, and I think that's the phase they're in now. So that right now they're drawing the map, behind closed doors. And some other states like Utah and Iowa have advisory commissions. So what they do is the commission is the first step in the process. So the commission draws drafts of the map and then the legislature votes on it. The commission in these states is not a second step, but it's the first step in the process. The other main way of doing redistricting is the commission control, almost total commission control. So the legislature doesn't vote on what map is implemented, but a commission has the power to vote on the map. And most of the commissions throughout the country and states are independent, I put that in quotes, independent citizen commissions. So even though these are not politicians and they're, they're brought on from outside the legislature. Not all commissions are created equal. Not all commissions are truly independent. So, someone might go on and say, "Oh, I'm an independent, and I'm not partisan whatsoever. I'm on the committee," but they might have certain ideals and ideologies that influence how the map is made, and I don't think you can truly say any of the commissions are independent, in my opinion. This is me personally. There are some that are more nonpartisan than others. I'll put it that way. And then there's some commissions, such as in Virginia, that are politician led. So they're not removed from kind of legislative influence from politicians that are in the assembly. Usually through whether it's a legislature or a commission, if those processes fail to work in providing consensus in terms of enough legislators or enough commission members voting on a map, it'll go to the state courts. And that's the process here in Connecticut. I'll reiterate the process in Connecticut at the end of the presentation. But many times, state courts have to draw the maps and approve, and that's the one that's ultimately implemented. So in terms of district criteria that states use, the criteria that's prioritized depends on the state. So I know Michigan, for example, they look at communities of interest very heavily. Some other states don't look at that very heavily. They look at proportionality or compactness or something else. But I'm going to hear a few of the criteria, and I'm going to go into them. So the first one I have here is contiguity, which means that all parts of a district are connected. You'd think this is a pretty straightforward one, but I have seen some drafts of maps in the past where they have districts that there's a part that's not even connected to the other part of the district, which is pretty crazy. Usually, I would say all states abide by that. I think even for some of the most brutal gerrymanders that I'll show you, the contiguity going against that's still a step too far for most people. Proportionality. So this would be, do the districts reflect the partisanship of the state? So for example, Georgia is practically a 50-50 state. Biden eked it out by this much, about 10,000 votes, I think. So that's a pretty even state. So is the map Georgia's drawing right now, is it going to be, 7 Democratic districts, 7 Republican districts? Is it going to be that equal? My opinion, it's not going to be that equal. It's not going to be proportional, probably, because the Republican legislature controls that process. But in terms of proportionality, that's what a map would look like. It would have equal number, Democrat and Republican districts. Compactness. So compactness, how to gauge that is a little tricky. The way a lot of my peers in the Princeton Gerrymandering Project look at it is kind of how rectangular or circular is the district shape. So how well does your district kind of fit in a circle or a rectangle pattern? You don't want these districts, and I'll show a couple examples that kind of snake throughout the country and connect, cities together, or you want a shape that represents the region that the voters in that area actually live in. And then the final one I have, or the second to last one I have here, is communities of interest. So are voters with similar interests kept together? So I would say I live in the Farmington Valley. I would call the Farmington Valley of Connecticut a community of interest. So in a congressional map that's being drawn here in Connecticut, does it keep the Farmington Valley together? Does it keep most of the Naugatuck River Valley together? Does it keep towns on the Gold Coast of Connecticut together? So, everything from Bridgeport down to Fairfield, everything on the coast of Fairfield County, pretty much. Windham County, the quiet corner, is that kept together? These are all kind of geographical communities of interest. There are also ones in states, obviously, that are economic. There are some that are demographic, cultural, ethnicity-based communities of interest. But the bottom line is, are those voters kept together, the ones that, you know, want to elect a representative that advocates for them and their interests? The final one I have here is minority representation. So in the Voting Rights Act, which was passed in 1965, Section 2 states that minority districts must have enough minority population to elect a candidate of choice. So that doesn't necessarily mean a majority. You'll see people differ on exactly what the percentage is, and it might vary based on the city or the state. But the bottom line is, can a minority community elect a candidate from their population? So a lot of us, my peers, we say, all right, you have to have enough minority voters where they can elect someone in a Democratic primary. And then if that district is a safe Democratic district, then that would make sense. So let's say the district has 40% Black population, that would be enough, because that 40% is going to be a majority of the Democratic primary electorate, and then that representative is almost certain to be elected to the legislature because it's a safe Democratic district. And if a minority district must be, if it can be drawn, it must be drawn. So you can't, if there's a population left and you can draw that district, you can't split it up. Whether this is enforced is complicated. A lot of times this isn't enforced, and there's been arguments people have made that have gotten around that rule, but it is written in the act that must happen. There used to be a section, or there still is a section in the VRA, Section 5, which requires federal pre-clearance of maps. The DOJ, the Department of Justice, would be the head of that, and they were when this was enforceable. But the John Roberts Supreme Court back in the early 2010s reversed this decision with Shelby County versus Holder. So the Section 5 wasn't taken out of the VRA, but it's practically unenforceable because the criteria the Department of Justice used, they said that was unconstitutional. So the pre-clearance isn't enforced anymore. And so the states basically have a lot more final jurisdiction over what maps are implemented. Okay, so now we go on to gerrymandering. So gerrymandering, again, in its most simple definition, is when boundaries are drawn in a way that clearly favors one political party over another. The origin of this term is in 1812, as Jackie put in the quiz. Elbridge Gerry redistricted Massachusetts, and someone from, I believe, the Boston Herald believed it resembled a salamander. So he nicknamed the whole process I guess they would call it back then a gerrymander, but I guess it changed to gerrymander at some point. I don't know how that happened. But in the modern era, gerrymandering is now aided by a lot of technology. So there are computer programs out there that can create the most efficient variation of a map in terms of maximizing a certain party's vote share in all the districts, and it's become very more efficient. And you can plug in code that says, all right, well, you have to abide by this rule, and drawing the map, and the computer spits out a variation that abides by all the rules the person wants it to abide by. So it's a whole different ball game now than it was 20, 30 years ago. And how it works is, with gerrymandering, is that certain communities of voters, whether it's a minority population, whether it's Democrats, whether it's Republicans, because you see it on both sides of the aisle, both Democrats and Republicans gerrymander to dilute the opposing party's vote share. So these people are either packed together in districts, so they're not spread out, or they're dispersed, they're cracked. We call them packing or cracking. So you can either put all the voters that you don't want to have power together, or you disperse them among many districts so that they're outnumbered in all of them. A common characteristic of gerrymandered boundaries, a lot of them have ugly borders. So I'll show you a couple examples of some really egregious looking districts. Although this isn't absolute. So not all gerrymanders have weird looking districts that don't pass the eye test. And not all districts that look ugly are gerrymanders. One of these, and this is a common misconception I've seen people give this example as a gerrymandered district, and it really isn't, is Illinois' 4th district. It looks like a pair of earmuffs. It's in the center of Chicago, but it's drawn that way to give Hispanics a seat where they can elect a Hispanic candidate. So it's an ugly looking district. If you looked at it and didn't know about the population of Chicago, you'd say, oh, that's a gerrymander, but it isn't, because it's a VRA mandated seat. So let's go to a couple examples I put up here. So this one on the left, this isn't a district anymore. The North Carolina map was redrawn, but I have a personal kind of vendetta against this district because I went to college in Charlotte, and this one really just offends me. It starts in Charlotte, and you can see, and it's in the shaded green, it travels along a highway all into Salisbury, up into Winston-Salem and Greensboro. And if you know anything about North Carolina, Winston-Salem and Greensboro is in the north of the state, and Charlotte's on the border of South Carolina, Mecklenburg County. So you have this weirdly drawn district that's, heavily Democrat and majority Black, and it's a gerrymander of Democratic voters in North Carolina. Thankfully, they redrew that. This map was struck down in court, but we'll see what the North Carolina legislature draws this time around. This second map here, this is Illinois, and this is actually the second draft of the map they're eventually going to vote on this cycle. So this is a map that's being drawn and revised, but I can't really zoom in here, but as you can see, there's a lot of, in Chicago, they kind of string out of Chicago, a lot of these districts. So they're dispersing a lot of the Democratic voters in Chicago, the minority voters in Chicago, in a way that includes some rural areas, and it's in a way to maximize kind of Democratic districts in that area. And if you can see here, this blue district in the northwest, it kind of goes from Rockford, which is in the north, all the way down to Peoria, which is in the central area of Ohio and Illinois, and Bloomington. This is a Democratic gerrymander. It's connecting cities that are not near each other together to preserve. This is a Democratic seat currently, so they're trying to preserve that seat. As the rural areas get more rural in that district, they want to add more cities to it to keep it blue for the Democrats. And then they're adding this yellow district here from East St. Louis, which, it's across from St. Louis in Missouri, all the way up to Springfield, into Champaign. So they're drawing that as a Democratic district that isn't currently there. So both of these, were done by opposing parties. Illinois, this is a Democratic gerrymander, and the North Carolina, this was a Republican gerrymander. So you see on both sides of the aisle, and many times both of them draw really bad, just egregious looking maps. So how is gerrymandering stopped? So mostly it's done through court cases. So lawsuits have sometimes resulted in the overturning of maps and caused states to have to do mid-decade redraws. So some examples of this previously were Florida And North Carolina, as I mentioned, and Pennsylvania in the previous cycle, they all had maps that had been, went through litigation and they were overturned. And right here in Connecticut in 1995, there's a lawsuit in Bridgeport, and Val mentioned this before. It was in the quiz. And the Supreme Court said, you got to redraw city council districts so that 5 of the 10 are, majority minority, whether that was Hispanic or African American. And so there was a settlement, and the city council districts were redrawn. So if you court cases is the main way to do this. However, a lot of the litigation is geared towards racial gerrymandering, so the packing or cracking of minorities. It's been harder generally to prove partisan gerrymandering in court. There's no clear metric to gauge that. There isn't a consensus way to gauge that aspect of gerrymandering. So some of those lawsuits that have argued partisan gerrymandering have not been successful. And as I said before, it's easier to prove gerrymandering in court when it's minority voters that are packed together or dispersed. It's just, that's the way the precedent has been. But even if you're not suing, calling your representative, calling the people who are in control, general awareness of this gerrymandering helps. Testifying in front of legislators. And, that's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing this. So as many people as possible know about this issue. I believe it's underreported in the media. I don't think it's, we hear a lot about policy coming out of Washington. And when we talk about elections, and it's a lot about kind of voting integrity and making, we sometimes hear about voter ID laws, and these are all important things. I think sometimes redistricting gets kind of swept under the rug a little bit, but it is very important. And everyone who becomes more aware of this and acts to preserve kind of one person, one vote, not people acting against the packing or cracking of certain communities, it helps a lot. So my final slide today is on the Connecticut redistricting process. So I mentioned a little bit of this before, but the first phase is the redistricting committee of the General Assembly. They form a committee every 10 years and they listen to public testimony. I testified on their virtual hearing they had in September, and I also submitted some testimony, and I'll show you their webpage because they're still taking testimony, I believe, even though the committee has already formed and disbanded this cycle because the census data that was required to make maps came out late this year, and they just didn't have enough time, or at least that's their argument, is that they didn't have enough time to really draw a map and vote on it and debate it. So they disbanded, and now the phase that's currently in progress is the redistricting commission. And that's made up of General Assembly leadership, and then they've elected a 9th member that's not from the Assembly, I believe. The 9th member they elected, he's a former representative. I believe it's the same 9th member they elected 10 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. And so they're currently debating and arguing and drawing a map. And then if they can't agree, it'll go to the state Supreme Court. And historically, Connecticut maps have been court drawn. It's always gone to that final step. But if you want I'm gonna just escape this for a second. If you want to submit testimony, it's at this site, and I'm gonna stop sharing for a second and then share my desktop so I can show you the page. So here's the page. You have this is the email you'll send your testimony to. and they post it right here. I don't believe there's any more up. No, there's no more public hearings, but here's all the testimony. Joan, I think, is this your testimony? And they'll post it here. So it's very simple. I'll show you mine. What I did is this is the testimony I spoke at the hearing. But I mean, just write up what you want them to see. You don't need, obviously you can't testify anymore, but I also submitted links to 2 maps I made. So I guess I can show that. I know we're running a little late. I'm running a little over here, but I'll show you what I drew for the committee, just to plug myself shamelessly. This is what I've drawn for the committee, and hopefully they looked at it. Hopefully they look at everyone's testimony, the committee and now the commission. Hopefully they do that sort of thing. But that's what I did, and I implore all of you to do the same. And that is the end of my presentation. I hope you learned a lot today. Thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you, Ryan. Wonderful.
That
wow.
was amazing.
This was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much, Ryan. And by the way, is it okay if you send us the PowerPoint so that we can share with Civic Ambassadors if they're interested? Would that be okay? Wonderful. And we don't have a lot of time, so I want to open it up for questions or comments. And of course, Joan, you testified. You offered testimony at the...
that was a funny story. I didn't, I really didn't, but I was up at Trinity College doing a presentation to Kyle Evans' class on redistricting. He runs a class on redistricting at Trinity. And he went to the website and there was my name. And I thought, that's weird. So I went back and looked at it, and somehow, and I don't know how it happened, an email exchange within the league somehow found its way to the committee. And so it was posted as my testimony, but in fact it isn't. So, but it's kind of funny.
Well, if they read it, you know, if any of those people read the legislature read it, that means it's testimony. So technically,
well, you look at it after the session, you'll see how silly it is. So.
That's right. That's right. And I don't know, Sandy, if you have any questions, or is Sandy still here? Yes, yeah,
I have a question for Ryan.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. It's okay, Joan. You can ask your
question. My question for Ryan is, Ryan, did you do any redraws of the state legislative maps, the House, State Senate, or the State House?
Yeah, well, I did. I submitted a state Senate map to the committee. I just don't have the time to do a state house one. That's like 150 districts. Like I love maps, but I mean, there's a limit. All right, I got school. I have my internship. All right, I don't the 150 district maps. If I had free time, I would do them. But there's a state Senate map in my testimony that you can look at as well.
Ryan, there is a tool, right? That you can you share the link for that?
Yes. So I will share the link to the website I use. It's called Days Redistricting. It's free. You just got to create an account. It is, in my opinion, by far the best redistricting software that's publicly available and free. There's other ones. There's one called Districtor. There's a few others. By far, Days Redistricting, in my experience, is the best one. They update it regularly with recent voting data. They have 2020 census data up. So it's got all the recent data. I put the link in the chat. So take a look at that, play around with it. It took me a while to figure it out. There's a lot of features, but if you want to get into drawing, that's the best way to do it.
Great, thank you, Ryan. And you're working with the Princeton redistricting. Can you say a few words about that?
Yeah, so I'm not here on behalf of Princeton. They're not sponsoring this event, but so what I do for them is every week they give us a list of maps to draw. It's basically a sign-up sheet, and there's 5 spots per map. And this week actually is the week they want us to draw Connecticut maps. So I don't have to go back, and I don't have to draw something from scratch. I'll just submit what I did for the, for the commission. But
that's great.
So every week they do that. And so they do 2 things with it. They put our maps basically in their big, database of maps, and it helps their algorithm that grades maps that from the legislature. So every draft that you see from a state in the past weeks or the coming weeks, Princeton will put on their report card site, and their algorithm will give it a letter grade. And that's what our maps help to do. It increases their sample size of maps. It increase for states. And the other thing they do is they send maps to state partners who they can use the maps, when arguing in front of the legislature. They can use our maps arguing, publicly. I won't go into the details, but Princeton is going to have some news about maps that we drew that I believe have been submitted to a certain state's legislature. You'll have to look at they told us not to release details about it, but they've given us some good news in the past couple of days. That's great. But they also do that. They work with state partners. I don't know if they work with some Connecticut organizations, but
we're in touch with Jason from the project. And I'm happy to hear that there was a call out to draw Connecticut maps, because at the beginning of our talking with Jason, it wasn't clear whether or not Connecticut would be covered by the Princeton project.
They cover, I believe, they cover all the states that have multiple districts, I believe. They're trying to. And they usually do it basically shortly before that state's process really gets into gear. So you weren't going to see Connecticut maps a month ago, but now that the commission is going to be ending next month, they're going to have, they're now starting with Connecticut.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Any other questions, Sandy? You mentioned that you did some work on redistricting. Can you share a little bit about that? If you're still on. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I just basically learned about it last year as a student at UConn for social work. Tanya Rhodes from the Institute did a great presentation on it, and in my political social work class. So I was pretty familiar with gerrymandering and what it consists of. Last year I went and to the Capitol and protested and lobbied for ending prison gerrymandering. And that was a great experience. Then recently with the redistricting and how the limited time and the warning that they gave to actually come in and testify was a huge deterrent, because it was like literally a week away, public hearing. So it didn't give you any awareness in terms of being able to testify, do what you needed to do, and come in there with the knowledge to make a difference. It's not very clear nor transparent how they do it behind closed doors. So I feel that in order to be successful also with ending gerrymandering, that it's a more transparent process, and it's done a little bit more similarly to what they do in California. And I also shared it with some of the social workers in school so that they can advocate on the community levels. Yeah. Because it's very important that the resources that these communities are missing out on, especially if it's for education, those teachers are aware of exactly the impact that redistricting has on that type of level, sort of the micro level of social work. And that's pretty much it. And I really enjoyed your presentation, Ryan.
Thank you.
Sandy, could I ask you a question?
Certainly.
This is Joan. So as I mentioned, one of the things that the League of Women Voters is really engaged in is upping the talk around the need for public engagement and transparency.
Right.
And as you know, right now, redistricting is embedded in our state constitution, which is hard to change. But we think it would also be possible to kind of wrap around that constitutional process a set of requirements for transparency, published timelines with more than a day or a week, and various other kinds of interactive types of mechanisms. So my question is, would you be interested in helping move that forward, that kind of idea of this public transparency legislation? Would Hartford Votes be interested in helping to bring some public attention to that idea?
I definitely would like to be a part of that for sure.
Yes,
thank you.
Absolutely. Well, this is important because as Ryan said earlier, so much focus is placed on voting and voter suppression and voter IDs and all this stuff. And redistricting is an important piece in being able for voters to have their voices heard. Especially in the case of minority communities, that has been historically an issue. And so it's important that, that there be transparency and also awareness about how important these processes are. Any other questions before we close? And one of the things, obviously, we want to thank Ryan. Thank you so much, Ryan, for inviting, for participating in this event, accepting our invitation. Really a fantastic presentation, absolutely fantastic. And before I close, I want to also thank Jackie, my colleague, for participating and planning that fun activity. And also Jennifer Morrison, who works for our communications unit to promote the event. At this point, I want to mention that we're going to post a link to a survey that we hope you'll be able to fill out. It won't take too long, a couple of minutes maybe, and it will help us to, learn how we can do these kinds of events better in the future. And also, I think most of you are already civic ambassadors. I know that, Joan, you are. And I don't know for sure if, Sandy, you are a civic ambassador, but if not, we're going to post the link to the Civic Ambassadors website page. You can find out information about becoming a civic ambassador there, and there's an online form that you can fill out. And there's no membership fee or anything like that. And then you can participate in events like this one. You can participate also in the annual Civic Ambassador Summit. We will be holding that summit next year, probably in May. And we have right now about 127 civic ambassadors in about 40 towns all over the United States, all over Connecticut, I'm sorry, 40 towns in Connecticut. So we want to continue increasing the representation of civic ambassadors. So we encourage all of you who are watching this webinar to go to the website page, www.everyday-democracy.org/civic ambassador. And Jackie has put the link there, and also the link to the survey. So please click on those. And yes, Joan?
I just have one more question. It goes really
Sure.
back to what I was talking with Sandy about.
Yep.
Would Everyday Democracy be interested in being part of a coalition to bring forward the idea of public transparency, more transparency, and public engagement around redistricting?
We would definitely be interested. And I'm the Director of Strategic Alliances and Partnerships. So I would be the person to
reach out to.
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
perfect.
I would definitely be interested. And I know that at UConn, the Nancy Humphreys Institute that Sandy is a part of, has also been involved in different kinds of efforts to educate. And I think, would you say advocacy also, Sandy? You've done some advocacy work?
Oh yeah, we actually are completing our newsletter. In the newsletter, I wrote a little bit about redistricting that will go out to the UConn School of Social Work.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, excellent. So I want to thank all of you, and especially Ryan, Ryan, thank you so much for really a fantastic presentation, and encourage all of you who are watching this to be engaged and make sure you participate in the future in redistricting efforts. You may still be able to submit written testimony, as Ryan said. Go to the website that Ryan mentioned earlier, and there may be opportunities for you to submit written testimony. Make sure you are informed, though, that you write a strong narrative that does, and you're welcome to refer to Ryan's map, of course, as something that the commission can look at. So again, thank you very much, all of you, for joining us, and we will be having other Civic Ambassador events in the future, and we'll keep you informed. Thank you for joining us today. Have a wonderful weekend.